This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
The empathy part is important. We want to express our sorrow for their loss. We've had technicians walk in while, the chaplain might be there. They'll be a part of a prayer. We've actually had technicians pray with the family. We've had technicians stay with the family. And we've just taken that initial time to not only get the equipment out, but then just maybe sit with that person for 5-10 minutes.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. Chris Maglioka of National HME is my guest today, and we're going to be talking about why medical equipment is such a vital part of the care of a hospice patient and family. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. So my guest today is a corporate executive. Might seem like a little bit of an odd choice. And we've had business people on the show before. That's not a big deal. Chris Maglioka is the Senior Vice President of Business Development for National HME. He's been with them 13 years, moved up through the ranks, started as a technician in HME years ago, and he's going to share that as part of his story. He is a military veteran. He proudly served in the U.S. Army alongside both of his brothers. He is based in Orlando, Florida. He travels. Actually, I met Chris at a hospice conference here in Texas, and he's got some unique stories to share, some unique insight to share, all about hospice medical equipment. It may seem like this is a very businessy conversation, but it's not really. You're going to hear the heart of the work that they do to provide medical equipment for seriously ill and terminally ill patients and their caregivers. So here's my interview with Chris Maglioka of National HME. Chris, welcome to the podcast. It's great to talk with you.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
Well, I'm excited. We met each other, saw each other in person several months ago at a hospice conference and gotten to know each other. Of course, I have known about National HME for a long time, all of my hospice career, actually, so almost 15 years. But just meeting you and getting to know you. So I'm going to ask you a little icebreaker question. You sent me over a bio, and I'm really reading some of your stuff. You're a family man. You're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. But I have to ask you, what the heck is West Ham United?
English Premier Soccer. It's soccer from England. They belong to the Premier League in England.
Oh, okay.
It's just a large European soccer club.
I could have Googled it, but I thought it would be more fun if I just asked you outright. I mean, that's a different sort of blend. American football basically and British football.
Right.
And you're fans of both. Interesting. Well, we are going to be talking all things DME today. Durable medical equipment. And it may seem like a really, really, really small microcosm of what we do in hospice care for our patients and families. But I can tell you, as a person who's been on the receiving end of that equipment and its use, both as a personal caregiver and as a hospice nurse, that DME is important. That equipment matters a lot. And that's all your company does. So tell me about what DME is and what services and supplies you guys give to patients and families at National.
Sure. So, like you stated, DME is durable medical equipment. And here at National, 98% of what we do is through working with hospice partners across the country. We provide, basically, we are the equipment extension of the hospice. Our delivery technicians deliver anything from a single point cane all the way up to a trilogy for the respiratory needs. Everything in between hospital beds, oxygen, wheelchairs, bath aids, walk aids, all types. Any patient can be comfortable at home when they come on hospice. That's the most important thing for us is, in hospice DME, our jobs are to get there as quickly as possible, set up the equipment as efficiently as possible with empathy, and just to ensure that the patient is comfortable throughout the hospice process.
So let's touch on something really quick. First of all, clarify what a trilogy is for my listeners that might not know what that is.
Well, a ventilator. It's a home ventilator.
Right.
Yeah, home ventilator system. Obviously those are, especially during the pandemic, were harder to come by. So unfortunately, the goal for hospice is to get the patient home a lot of times. And being able to have those trilogies on hand is a major factor, especially with those high acuity respiratory patients.
Right. Some of our patients are very complicated, and to be able to access that kind of medical equipment, get it in there before the patient arrives at the house, get them situated, that's a major thing. So the DME that National provides goes from the very simple single foot cane all the way up to the trilogy. It's a pretty wide expanse of services. But one of the things that strikes me about what you just said is you get the equipment there installed or delivered with empathy.
Yes, absolutely. The biggest thing that I usually talk about is the difference between hospice DME and your private insurance Medicare DME. For a Medicare or a Blue Cross Blue Shield type patient that comes home and needs DME equipment in the home, we can get that order today and schedule it to be delivered Monday or Tuesday. To where we know, working with our hospice partners, that 9 times out of 10, that equipment needs to be there today.
Right.
So the efficiency level is different because we understand it has to be there today. There's a reason why we need to get it there today. And as much as we're trying to, I almost tell our technicians, we're almost like ducks on water. I need your feet going 100 miles an hour, but you have to have that calming presence when you walk into a home or a facility. Every situation is different, and we have to be there to educate patients on equipment. A lot of times after the nurse has left, the caregiver is present, the aide might have already come and gone, the chaplain might have already come and gone. So we're there after the fact where they've gotten all this education on hospice, their medication plans, things of that nature. Now we're bringing in anywhere from 1 to 6 pieces of equipment that we have to make sure they understand at least the basic way of using that equipment and troubleshooting those pieces of equipment. So that way it's not a constant. The last thing we want to do is disrupt a patient when they get home. So our goal is to be that one stop, be efficient, show the empathy of it, because we understand hospice, the end of life, and, we have to have that compassion. So we tend to take our time once we get there. So that's where duck on water is hurry up, get there, but then breathe, take your time. Let's do the setups and let's do them right.
Right. You can be busy on the underneath of the water, but on the surface, you want it to appear you're the only family I have. I'm not in a rush. I'm going to take my time with you. Right. I'm going to explain everything. Plus, with DME, especially when it's being delivered at the start of care, it's drinking from the fire hose when it comes to how much information and education these people are having thrown at them. Mm-hmm. And the intrusion into the house. So the delivery guys that are doing the setup, they're just another person invading the personal living space of somebody who's dealing with a critical situation. We have enough of that with just the hospice team. People will tell us there's so many people coming in and out of the house. Yes, but once we get you started and get you settled, once we get that hospital bed in, mm-hmm. we can get you settled and things will calm. So let's talk about the timing a little bit. Is all the equipment delivered up front? Can patients get stuff later on? How does the timing of delivery when there are equipment needs, how does that work?
It's usually done after the initial admission into hospice. Whether they're in a hospital facility or even at home, the nursing team goes out, does their initial assessment. So we have their initial needs, whether it's oxygen, the bed, bath aids, and things of that nature. Usually there's additional equipment that's delivered a day, maybe 2 or 3 days after the fact, as well as, especially when patients are being admitted through the hospital, you're seeing the oxygen, the wheelchair, things of that, maybe the bed because they need it at home. But then once you get home and do the home assessment, you might come to find that they had a nebulizer, they need a nebulizer again, or, maybe a different style wheelchair will work for them. So there could be multiple deliveries. When it comes to oxygen, we already place in, reoccurring orders if they need portable oxygen as well. So it's really case by case on how we handle the equipment deliveries.
In my experience with patients, hospital beds seem to be a big thing. And I know there are a lot of reasons for it. For one thing, the family's responsible for making space in the home. And those beds are big. And for a caregiver to be able to get to a patient, you really need to be able to access all 4 sides of the bed, which is difficult in some homes, right? Mm-hmm. So the flip side of that is there are psychosocial and emotional impacts of having a hospital bed, especially if you have to have it in a public area of your house, in a living room, which was my father-in-law's case. My in-laws have a 2-story townhome, and my father-in-law's hospital bed was placed in the living room. And so here you have this person with this huge piece of equipment. They've had to move furniture, so the living space that they may have had for 60 years has been disrupted. And then the person is sort of, to me, on display. I'm sick. Everybody gets to see me. I have no privacy. And then you have the emotional impact of the bed that I shared with my partner, spouse, for years. Now I'm not in that space anymore. Do you find that a lot of people end up getting those hospital beds not right at admission, but later on? They're more accepting of the equipment later on as things change and they get a little more reality thrown at them?
In certain situations, yes. A lot of times, again, not knowing everything that they're getting. A lot of times, the nurses might talk to family member A at the hospital. They're accepting of it. We've gotten to situations where that first family member knows about it, understands about it, is wanting it. But then when we get to the home, there might be other family members there instead. They're not sure. So we, just working with them. And more importantly, our technicians working with the nurses in the field. Right. Just having that communication is vital. We have a standing way we do it is if there's any deviation to what the nurse orders, we call them anywhere. So in those instances, even with the bed wanting to be delivered, being not accepted, we call them right there from our vehicles outside, just to let them know the situation. I'm here. The family doesn't really want this bed. Would you like to speak to them? Would you like us to hold off? So it's really just working with the nurse, especially because, again, when we go into a family's home, nobody knows who National HME is.
Right.
We represent the hospice. And, we can have our names on our shirts and on our vehicles, on our booklets, but they know the hospice that we're partnering with and working with. So we want to make sure that the majority of our communication comes through the hospice.
Right. You are definitely a partner, part of the interdisciplinary team, the whole care team that takes care of patients and families. I think a lot of people, they just don't know what they don't know until that nurse comes in and says, well, here's the list of things we can provide for you. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, that's awesome. We had no idea we could get a shower chair. And also, I think caregivers, you probably find this a lot. They get in there at the hospital, they'll say, well, we don't need this, this, and this, and this. I don't need oxygen at home. We can manage it. We don't need a hospital bed. I've been caring for him this way. Well, after a hospital stay, the patient's status has changed, or maybe there's been an acute event like a stroke, something like that. Status is different. And then all of a sudden the caregiver calls a couple days later and says, I can't possibly do this like this. We've got to have a bed. We've got to have some help. He's trying to climb out of the bed. I need rails on, side rails on the bed. We need some safety equipment out here. I think there's a lot of, there's reality that comes with having that hands-on. This is what's happening real time right now. And I have been on the side of things as a hospice nurse, calling for a patient that had adamantly said absolutely no hospital bed. He wanted to stay in his recliner. That's where he was comfortable. It was sort of part of his functional identity, for lack of a better term. And he began to go into a crisis. He was beginning to actively die, and his wife said, I can't take care of him in this chair. We got to get him out. That was 2:00 in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I called the DME company and I said, I'm really sorry, but I need a bed and I need it now. This guy can't breathe. He can't move. His wife can't take care of him. And I don't think the patient lived more than 24 hours after that. So I think it's good for caregivers and the hospice folks to know that regardless of how long that patient's going to use that equipment, that the DME company is happy to get it out there. If it's 6 hours, 2 days, 6 months, it doesn't matter how long they're going to use it. It's just that there's a need.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So how did you get started in DME? Because when I hear you talk about this, when we met and I talked to you at the conference, it seems like it's more than just a job for you. You seem to have an understanding of what the needs are.
Yeah. So, I officially got started about 25 years ago, fresh out of the military, engaged to my wife, starting a family. What am I going to do now? And, how I got started was kind of funny. It was my sister-in-law as a respiratory therapist, and she worked for a company called Lincare, and said, I know you're just out. I know you're dabbling in construction. They have this, it's called delivery technician. You should check it out. It's rewarding. And I'm like, oh, what do you mean rewarding?
Yeah, it's just delivery.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I went and applied. I got the job. And, it then kind of goes back to when I was younger, in my 13, 14. My grandfather was on hospice. And just seeing those guys come in with, back those days, they had the liquid oxygen where you'd have to fill the portable off the big tanks. And yeah. I was just in awe of it. It was like, these guys are like carrying this big tank in, there's smoke coming out of this machine. What is this? Just, it intrigued me, all the equipment. So from day one, I just fell in love with it and kind of knew that this is my field. This is my passion, being able to go out and, with Lincare, it was more of, you were building relationships with the patients because, they were mostly Medicare patients, to where I could set them up and see them every week for the next year or two. And so just building that. And a lot of times you were the person they seen every week, and just having those conversations and, being able to teach somebody on how to use a piece of equipment and things of that. It was very rewarding. It felt like when you got home, you did good today. You made a difference. It didn't take long until I just became fully engaged into the business. And to this day, that first 5 years of starting, we moved every year just because different positions in different states came available. So uprooted, moved up, learned more, different position, and started my career there. And then it was probably like 12 years into my DME career where, I came to a crossroads, like, do I really want to keep doing this? And I actually took 2 months off. In between Rotec. And then I saw this position for national HME, and I said, hospice DME. I said, well, I've done a little bit of hospice, but, not that much. Talked to the folks at the time that were part of the company. And I said, you know what, I'm going to stay, I'm going to do it. And then just found a whole new love for it because, again, it's totally different from hospice DME to the normal DME. And I was like, now I feel very rewarding because, again, just knowing that now that I'm longer into it, I always say, DME is 10% of a hospice focus. Internally, it's 10% of cost. It's 10% of, making sure that that's running efficiently. They're a part of the team. It's the same thing when we're visiting the patients. We're 10% of what the patients go through with hospice. We're there. I tell our teams every day, if we go in, do our jobs, set up the equipment or pick up the equipment, and nobody says nothing, that's your reward. Because we did exactly what we needed to do. There was no disruption, and we officially did it. And Yeah, I mean, 25 years into it, and I still have no problem waking up on Monday morning and going to work. I love it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. There's something about working with meaning. Absolutely. But you wouldn't think that a piece of medical equipment would have that kind of impact. But I tell you, as a previous caregiver, a recovering caregiver, equipment is a big deal. You may say it's only 10%, right? You're talking about the finances and the portion of the care. But for a caregiver, that's a big thing. That is a big thing for a patient to have a shower chair to sit on.
Yes.
So that they can have a shower. It's a difference between being clean, which is part of being comfortable, which is part of quality of life.
Right. Absolutely. It's one of the training tools and discussions I have with technicians on the road is, look, I understand personally you get frustrated at 9:00 at night when an order comes in for a commode, bedside commode. I says, but you always just remember what you're doing and remember the reason why that commode needs to go at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night.
That's right.
It doesn't happen every day, but there's a reason why. It's because somebody can't make it, whether it's up the stairs, down the stairs, or even down the hall to go to the, to use the facility. And that bedside commode is very important to them. So
yes.
Although it's a disruption and frustration in your life, you just have to take a step back each time and remember why you're doing it.
Yeah, there's an incredible contribution there when you tease that thread out, right? The delivery is made for a bedside commode, which means the patient isn't incontinent. They don't have to wet the bed or soil themselves, which means the caregiver doesn't have to clean them up, which means less disruption to their schedule, their sleep, all kinds of things. And so when you pull it out and you look at all this chain of events and what's happening, it's a major deal to have a bedside commode of all things. It's crazy. I think we forget how much impact we have on patients and caregivers. Regardless of discipline, regardless of whether you're a partner, a contract partner with the hospice team, it makes a difference. Pharmacy deliveries, equipment deliveries, those guys are super important, and how they interact with patients and families is really impactful. It's so important. So how do you keep the staff connected with these patients and their stories, these people that you're taking care of? Because you guys have products, right? But you have a service, which is a different mindset. So how do you keep your teams connected? How do you foster that sense of empathy with the team?
A consistent empathy training. So it starts with, and I'm sure many people know of aided training. Our technicians have to go through that quarterly. And the good thing with technology is YouTube is a tool from anywhere from just a basic, what is hospice? But we've pulled videos to constantly show our technicians on anywhere from a day in the life of a hospice nurse to hospice through a family's eyes. We've been gracious enough to have some families come to locations and thank them and speak to them, like just grateful for the professionalism they showed. We partner with hospice partners in areas where they'll come in and just train. We want them to train our new staff. So we kind of do training. They train our team on what is hospice because it's very important. I always tend to shy away from hiring people with experience in DME on the Medicare side because it's so different. The empathy itself is at a higher level through hospice DME. So just, through the hospice, just building that partnership by having, discussions and trainings and, fully understanding what we're doing. It's just, we just try different ways. And again, most of it is technology and being able to pull those videos in as part of their trainings.
That's very cool that you keep them grounded like that. And the fact that people would be so moved, this is how you know it's monumental, the service that you're providing, that a customer comes in after the fact and says, hey, I want you to know that this was important to us. It made a difference. So let's talk about what good DME service should look like for a hospice patient and the caregivers. I think one of the things we haven't touched on is some of these things need to be in the home before the patient even gets there, if they're coming out of a hospital. So talk about how that would look like and what a patient and a caregiver could expect from good DME.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing and the most important thing is the communication. A lot of times, our hospice, the hospice nurse is the middle person, relaying the information to us, back to them, to the family. So just having that coordination that all three parties are in line. So if it's meeting with the family, we always go by the direction of the hospice nurse. So we understand that we have in our field, we call stat orders. Those are your new admissions, your hospital discharges, respiratory distress, and, after they have equipment, immediate service concerns. So any one of those types of orders are always in a 2 to 4 hour window. Again, we do every effort to make it within that time frame. If there's any deviation from the time frame or equipment needs, we're calling that ordering nurse immediately, because we know that they have to change something up or communicate something back to the family or to transport, whatever the case might be.
Chris, what do you consider an immediate service need? What kind of things would need immediate care?
Anything from, anything that plugs in a wall always has the opportunity to malfunction.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. We could, a low air loss mattress, the pump's not working. Any type of pump, the concentrator machine's alarming, and the patient ran out of oxygen tanks and they have to go to the doctors. We need to get those tanks out there immediately. The hospital bed malfunctioned. Any type of equipment malfunction that is an immediate need to the patient's comfort and care, that is what we call a stat order. We have to get there. But again, it's just keeping the family informed. We've gone so far to where when an ordering nurse orders through us, the family will know through text messaging when the technician's on their way. They'll actually know the technician's name. So, we get the order, our call center calls that patient's family and lets them know, we received the order from the hospice, we'll be out there this afternoon. The technician will contact you with an ETA, but when we say afternoon, we're meeting between 12 and 5. And then again, they're going to get that next phone call plus a text message from the technician introducing themselves, letting them know who they are, and then with their ETA. Again, if the technician, unfortunately, if the vehicle breaks down or there's a delay, we're immediately calling that family, we're immediately calling the nurse. It all starts and ends with the communication part.
So important. So let's talk about the most important event, the most impactful event for family is when the death occurs. A lot of times that equipment is an uncomfortable or painful reminder of what's just happened, of the loss that's occurred. Talk to me about how National handles when there's a death in the home and how you remove equipment.
So it starts with the order itself. If we get no direction, we do pick up orders next day, 7 days a week. But in those situations that we were discussing earlier, especially with home patients, that equipment set up in the living room or dining room right in the middle, they got family coming. They really don't want the family to see this equipment. So those are same day pickups. The empathy level goes up because, our technicians, when they go into a home, there can be anywhere from 1 to, I've been in homes where there's a dozen or so, if not more people in the room around the equipment. So it's just the empathy part is important. We want to express our sorrow for their loss. We've had technicians walk in while, the chaplain might be there. They'll be a part of a prayer. We've actually had technicians pray with the family. We've had technicians stay with the family. In some situations where you go in, a spouse may have passed and the other spouse is the only one in the home. Mm-hmm. And we just taken that initial time to not only get the equipment out, but then just maybe sit with that person for 5-10 minutes, just chat about them, let them just, talk about the person that just passed. That goes a long way. Just taking our time. We want to rush in and get out, but we also don't want to go that fast. It's really, every pickup could be different. Our technicians just have to evaluate the situation and understand, is it just best to get the equipment, again, sorry for your loss, and leave. That way, just efficiently we're in and out. Or it might just be, again, just sitting down. And I've done that plenty of times where I would sit with the family.
I think having that equipment taken out sometimes is a little bit of it's a reality check for identity change for the caregiver or the people who have had the loss. some of our patients are in those hospital beds for months or years, especially our Alzheimer's dementia folks that have been bedridden, stroke, heart attack patients. And so that's become an identity, a part of the identity inside the household, especially like you're saying, if it's been in one of those public areas, a living room, dining room. I think to have that part of the identity removed, that's another physical reminder. First, the person's body is taken out. That's that first physical reminder that they're being taken out of their home. And then we're going to take away the place where they've been lying or sitting, or the equipment that's been sustaining them for weeks or months, maybe even years. So I love it that your technicians understand that impact, and that that's a great time to flex that empathy muscle and sit there with them.
Right.
That's nice.
Absolutely.
I think that it's an important piece for hospice professionals to remember. Regular DME medical equipment is different from hospice DME, just because the kind of care we provide, the philosophy we have, is very different from curative care. So every little piece has impact. Our patients don't have the luxury of our ignorance or our hesitancy or our lack of compassion. And that comes from everybody that has contact, regardless of whether they're part of the interdisciplinary team or they're a contractor.
Correct.
Yeah. So I have one last question for you. How has working with hospice DME, working with hospice patients and caregivers, changed you and shaped you personally?
Personally, it kind of been in DME for 25 years, 24 that's been in operations. So this past year I've been in business development, hit the conferences, just really speaking the word of national HME. But I still find myself when I go into markets to take that day, getting in a truck and go make some deliveries.
So you actually go out into the field?
Yes, I still do. Even this upcoming week, I'll be in Atlanta. I plan on at least for a half a day. Number one, it's rewarding to our technicians to just show them I understand what the job itself is not bad. It's the mentality part from a technician. Because again, it's just those different situations you walk in. But for me, I want to keep doing it because it reminds me why we're doing this. To be able to just have that 10-minute touch of a family during this time and just to show them compassion. That's all anybody sometimes wants, is just that compassion and understanding. That to me itself is just rewarding, just to be there for somebody in their time of need. And it's a lot of times not even the patients, but it's the family members that are around the patient, because it's after the fact or whatever the case might be.
Right.
Just, let them know that there's people out there that care. And, there's people out there that want to make sure, as they go through this process. And the beautiful thing with hospice is the support they have through that process, not only from the hospice team, but the extensions of the DME. That's just, that it's rewarding. And it makes me, live that in day to day, just normal stuff, just show a little empathy, a little compassion, just because somebody doesn't move from the red light doesn't mean I have to lay on my horn and yell at them and scream, it gives me pause in my day to day.
That's wonderful. We're very blessed to work in an industry where if you can see the meaning and feel the meaning in what we do, it drives our purpose. It drives the why of why we stay in this business, because it's a hard business. Hospice is competitive. There are tons of other equipment companies out there. They're all trying to get the same piece of the pie, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's got the same equipment, beds, canes, concentrators. We're all trying to do the same things. But to have meaning in your work creates longevity and personal satisfaction, and it's just creates an enrichment to our lives, I think. Mm-hmm. All right, so Chris Maglioka, what is the one thing that we haven't talked about or I haven't asked you that you would want people to know about the work that you do?
The word is getting out there. One thing the National HME has done, we revamped our whole operation. So in the past year, we went from like a normal company would, scheduling our team, having processes for our team that are internally for us, where we've really branched out and designed our scheduling of our technicians, our training of our technicians around hospice. We have the mentality internally that our technicians, you represent hospice, not a hospice agency. because we don't want our technicians to focus on which hospice they're servicing. For the technicians, it's about servicing each patient individually. Let our managers, myself, our leadership team, we'll take care of the back business dealings with the hospice agencies. Our technicians' main focus is to take care of patient. Doesn't matter what hospice they're from. And that's the biggest difference that we're trying to get the message out to everybody. And, it's starting to resonate, and we're happy, and we love the field that we're in. And just, again, I love talking about it.
I love it. Okay, Chris, so where can hospice agencies, if they're wanting to partner with you, interested in having conversations about a contract, how can they get in touch with National HME?
The easiest way is nationalhme.com. There is an info contact tab that they can select, and that information will come directly to me.
Awesome. Thanks for taking time to talk with me today. It's so great.
Thank you for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
So hopefully now you see why Chris Maglioka was interviewed and was my guest today. There's a heart behind the work that they do, and he's got his own personal experience, his grandfather. And he told me off audio, that his grandfather was his guy. He said they were buds, and he's been gone over 20 years. So Chris's experience with hospice with his grandfather was impactful. And he's learned the value of service in providing products. Because they provide products, right? I get that. That's medical equipment. But because they provide their service with empathy, and they're well-rounded, they're training that caregiver, they're training that patient, they make multiple deliveries. And I will tell you, as a hospice nurse, absolutely, once you get to know the patient, or as they decline, that hospice nurse is going to be calling back and said, look, we've gone from a walker, now we need a wheelchair. Now we need a hospital bed. Now we need a suction machine. And multiple deliveries, National's there. That DME equipment is there. Chris's story reveals how impactful his work at a DME company can be. It makes a difference in the lives of our patients and their families. And one of the important things Chris reminds his delivery technicians to remember is why they do this. It's not about the hospice agency, right? Because they will provide equipment for patients from several different hospice agencies, whoever National is contracted with. It's about the patient. It's about the patient and the caregivers. So they have to remember why they do this. It's service. It's service. And of course, communication is at the heart of all of that. My favorite saying is 98% of the problems in this world can be solved by better communication. And that quotation, I like to quote it because I said it. I wrote that. But it's absolutely true. So communication is a huge part of the coordination of care for a hospice patient. And National DME is included in that. Their delivery technicians take time to show empathy and provide presence, which again doesn't seem like it would be part of their job description. It's just medical equipment. And maybe you're not even setting it up and showing people how to use it. I don't need to show you how to use the controls on the bed because I'm picking it up. But how impactful is that for a family? This is where my person died. In this bed with this oxygen on. The concentrator was on, the buzzing was going 24/7 for the last 6 weeks. I used this bed to turn him, to care for him, to keep him safe. I got in the bed with my partner. And now the bed is off. There's silence in the house. The concentrator's been turned off. My person is gone. And now you're going to pick up this equipment and take it out. That last physical reminder of the illness and this intense experience is going out the door. DME technicians should know the impact of these actions. It's not simply another equipment pickup. And that's what Chris is teaching his team. Providing presence. It's unusual. Chris is also remembering his own why. He gets out there when he travels and he makes deliveries. So he stays in touch with the work that his technicians are doing, their job roles and their challenges, but he's also staying connected with the patients and families that they serve. Because obviously, hospice DME is way more than just products and deliveries. It's service. If you want to connect with National HME, if your hospice agency would be interested in contracting with them, you can visit their website at nationalhme.com, send in your request, and probably you're going to be connected with Chris Maglioka because he said he coordinates all that. So check out their website if your agency is looking to contract with a DME provider. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram. Send your questions and comments to me by email at helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.